Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to admit, I've been sitting with a research stack for this one for about 3 days now, and it's haunting.
It is. It's heavy. I think haunting is absolutely the right word.
Usually we're looking at tech or, a piece of history or some bright future trend, but this is just different.
It stays with you.
It does. And we should be clear from the top. We aren't doing the usual true crime thing today. You know, the drill yellow tape, blood spatter analysis, the whole whodunit courtroom drama?
Right.
We are stripping all of that away. We're trying to look at the terrifying silence before the first siren screams. We're attempting to step inside the mind of killer before the act even happens.
We're looking at the machinery, the actual neural pathways, the chemical misfires, the twisted logic that gets them there.
And the question we're trying to answer isn't how did they do it, it's why. And not the simple TV we're asking. Is murder the product of a broken machine, a brain that's physically damaged?
A software glitch, a thinking error.
Or, and this is the part that genuinely kept me up last night, is it a feature of human evolution that's just, waiting for the right trigger?
That's the homicide adaptation theory. And it is. It's controversial for a very good reason. It essentially asks if we are, in some deep, ancient way, hardwired for violence.
It's an incredibly uncomfortable thought.
It is. But before we get into the weeds on that, we need to look at the scale of this, because you found a number in one of the university studies that I think is going to make a lot of people pull their cars over.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, the listener, a question. And I want you to be really honest, just with yourself, because nobody's watching. Have you ever had a dark thought?
A fleeting one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Someone cuts you off in traffic, or a boss just humiliates you in a meeting, or a partner betrays you. And for a split second, just a microsecond, your brain goes to a place that would put you in prison for life.
And if you're sitting there shaking your head no, well, statistically, you might be lying to yourself.
The source material, specifically a survey of university students and faculty, found that between 50 and 91% of people admitted to having a homicidal fantasy at some point in their lives.
91%.
91. That's basically everyone you know. Your mailman, your dentist, your grandmother.
It just shifts the entire paradigm, doesn't it? It suggests that the idea of killing isn't the anomaly. The thought isn't the strange part.
The anomaly is the mechanism that stops us from doing it.
Exactly. The core mystery we are diving into today is this. If the thought is that common, what is the specific biological and psychological switch that flips for that tiny minority who actually act on it?
Okay, let's unpack that switch, because the sources are very clear that it's not just one thing. It's more like a cascade of failures. And it has to start with the hardware, the biology itself.
Right. You have to start with the architecture of the impulse. Because before a thought can ever become an action, it has to pass through the physical structure of the brain.
Let's start with that controversial theory you just mentioned, the homicide adaptation. When I first read this in the notes, I actually wrote, wait, really? In the margin, it sounds like we're saying murder is natural.
It's deeply uncomfortable, right? It goes against everything we like to believe about civilization and progress.
Absolutely. We like to think we're these enlightened, rational beings, and that violence is just a breakdown, a mistake, an error. But this theory comes along and says, no, murder isn't a bug. It's an app.
It's an old app, but it's still on the hard drive. Think about it from a purely evolutionary psychology perspective. Go back, say, 50,000 years. There's no police force. There are no courts, no laws.
It's just you and your small tribe against the world.
Exactly. And if a rival is stealing your food source or threatening your offspring or actively trying to kill you, you have a fundamental survival problem.
Right. And I have, 3 options? I could try to talk it out, which, probably isn't going to work.
Unlikely.
I can run away, which means I'll lose my territory, my food, everything. Or
you eliminate the problem permanently. The theory posits that the human brain evolved specific cognitive modules to simulate homicide as a high-risk, high-reward strategy.
So it's a cost-benefit calculator.
A brutal one. It's running the numbers. If I kill this person, I keep the food, I protect my family, I secure my status. But if I get injured in the attempt, I could die.
So those dark fantasies we talked about earlier, that 91%, that's not us being evil. That's the simulator running in the background.
That's the theory. Your brain is wargaming. It's running a simulation to see if the outcome is worth the immense risk. And thankfully, for 99.9% of us, the brain comes back with a very clear result. Too risky. Abort. You will go to jail. You will ruin your life. Do not do it.
But the capacity to run that simulation in the first place, that's ancient.
That's the adaptation. It reminds me of a chess computer calculating millions of possible moves, and one of those moves is to just flip the entire board over.
That's a great analogy. It's an option, a terrible option, but it's in the playbook.
Exactly. And the sources suggest, in a very dark way, that we are the descendants of the people who were really, really good at making that calculation. If your ancestors were pure pacifists who just let everyone steal their food and threaten their children, well,
They didn't survive to pass on their genes.
they didn't. So we're here, in part, because our ancestors knew when to fight, and sometimes that fight was to the death.
But the stack also offers a counter-argument to this, which is a little more comforting, I guess. The byproduct hypothesis.
Right. This is what you could call the slip-up theory. It's a bit less deterministic. It argues that we didn't evolve to kill, we evolved to be aggressive.
For other reasons.
For other perfectly normal survival reasons. We have adrenaline, testosterone, the fight-or-flight response. These are for hunting or for defending ourselves from a predator. Murder, in this view, is just what happens when that dial gets turned up to 11 and the knob breaks off. It's an overreaction.
So one theory says we're cold, calculating chess players, considering every move, and the other says we're just clumsy beasts who sometimes hit too hard under stress.
That's a good way to put it. But here's the key. Whether it's a feature or a slip-up, the hardware required to do it is sitting inside all of our skulls right now. The real question is, what holds it back? What's the cage?
And this is where the neuroscience gets really fascinating. The sources talk extensively about one specific part of the brain, the frontal lobe.
More specifically, the prefrontal cortex, or PFC. Think of this as the CEO of your brain, the adult in the room. It's the reflective system.
It's the part that's doing long-term planning.
Exactly. It regulates emotion, it handles self-awareness, and crucially, it's responsible for decision-making and weighing consequences. It is literally the voice in your head that says, don't punch that guy, you'll go to jail and lose your job.
And in many killers, this CEO is asleep at the wheel.
Or the CEO has been fired. The sources detail with incredible specificity how damage to this area correlates with violence. And they break it down into two very distinct types of injury, which is a nuance we often miss in pop culture. We just say brain damage, but the location of that damage matters immensely.
Okay, let's drill into these, because the distinction is wild. The first is orbitofrontal injury. Where is that exactly?
So if you put your hand on your forehead, it's the part of the cortex that sits right above your eyeballs, the orbits.
Okay, I'm touching it. So if I get hit here with a baseball bat or have a tumor, what happens to my personality?
You develop what the literature calls pseudopsychopathy, and the name is important. You don't become a cold, calculated, Hannibal Lecter-type killer. You become a chaotic one.
What does that look like in practice?
You become explosive. The sources describe these patients as verbally lewd, incredibly impulsive, and prone to what's called episodic dyscontrol. You just lose your filter entirely.
So this is the guy who is laughing hysterically at a funeral or screaming at a waitress because the soup is cold and then suddenly swinging a fist over it.
Yes, it's messy, unpredictable violence. The brakes are completely cut, but the engine is revving high. They lose all interpersonal sensitivity. They can't read the room. They can't regulate their emotions, and they can't stop their own impulses. But it's not calculated. It's purely reactive.
Okay, so that's the explosive type. Contrast that with the second type the sources mentioned, ventromedial injury.
This is located a bit deeper in the brain, closer to the center line between the two hemispheres. Damage here leads to what they call acquired sociopathy. And this is the really chilling one.
Why?
Because these patients, they can pass an IQ test with flying colors, they can solve complex logic puzzles. If you sit them down and ask them, is it wrong to kill another person? They will say, yes, of course, it is illegal and morally wrong.
They know the rules. They can recite them.
Perfectly. They know the script of society, but they don't feel the rules. The study mentioned a key finding. They lack autonomic reactions to punishment.
Unpack that for me, because that sounds like a superpower, but a terrible one.
Okay, imagine I tell you that in 60 seconds I'm going to give you a painful electric shock. Right now, just thinking about it, your heart rate is probably going up a bit. Your palms might get a little sweaty.
Right, I'm getting a physical response.
A warning.
A warning.
That's a somatic marker. It's your body's alarm system. It's the physical sensation of fear. These individuals with ventromedial damage flatline. They show no physiological response. They literally cannot feel the physical sensation of, this is a bad idea.
So the logic is there, but the gut check is gone.
Precisely. The gut feeling of consequence is absent. And without that gut check, you have a catastrophic disconnect. The high-order reflective brain, the part that knows the rules, is completely cut off from the low-order impulsive brain. So they might act on a violent impulse because they simply don't feel any of the biological warning signals that would stop a normal person in their tracks.
It's like driving a car where the speedometer and the warning lights are all dead. You know the speed limit, but you have no feel for how fast you're actually going.
That's a perfect analogy. You can't feel the danger.
So we have the broken brakes in the prefrontal cortex. But for the car to crash, you also need an engine. We need to talk about the part of the brain that generates the rage in the first place, the amygdala.
The amygdala and the broader limbic system. This is the ancient reptilian part of the brain, the beast in the basement. It generates the immediate, raw emotional responses, fear, aggression, the fight-or-flight instinct.
It's their first responder.
Exactly. In a healthy brain, there's a constant conversation. The amygdala screams, "Threat! That guy just bumped into you." And the prefrontal cortex calmly steps in and says, "Calm down. It's a crowded bar. It was an accident. Let it go."
It's a checks and balances system, a conversation between the beast and the CEO.
A beautiful checks and balances system. The amygdala is the gas pedal, the cortex is the brake. But in the impulsive killer, the sources describe a specific and catastrophic neural imbalance.
The gas pedal is stuck to the floor.
And the brake lines have been cut, the amygdala screams, and the prefrontal cortex, the cage, is too weak, too damaged, or too underdeveloped to hold it back. The source material even compares impulsive violence to episodic discontrol or a seizure-like discharge from the limbic system.
That's a disturbing image, a seizure of violence. It implies a total loss of control.
It implies that for some of these people, the violent act is a biological hijacking. It's not a choice in the way we think of choosing what to have for dinner. It's a neurological storm, a massive discharge of energy that bypasses the conscious rational mind entirely.
So we have this compelling image of the killer as a broken machine. But not all killers are these raging, explosive types with broken brakes. Some are incredibly calm, they're cold, methodical.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the break machine theory gets a lot more complicated.
It does, massively. And that takes us to the second major section of our deep dive, hot blood versus cold blood. Because the sources are absolutely clear, you cannot lump all killers into one single neurological bucket.
This is what the research calls the bimodal classification.
Correct. It's a fundamental split. You have effective aggression and you have predatory aggression.
Effective is the hot blood, the crime of passion.
Yes. Effective or reactive aggression. This aligns perfectly with that orbitofrontal damage we talked about. It's characterized by intense autonomic arousal. If you put a heart monitor on them during the crime, their heart is pounding out of their chest, they're sweating, breathing heavily.
They're in a state of extreme emotion.
Overload. They perceive an imminent threat, and the goal of the violence is simply threat reduction. They are lashing out to make a bad feeling stop. Biologically, this is that lower prefrontal functioning we discussed. It's a fight response that has gone completely haywire.
And then there's the other side of the coin, predatory.
Predatory or instrumental aggression. This is the cold blood. And honestly, this is the one that gives me chills. It's defined by a lack of conscious emotion, minimal autonomic arousal. Their heart rate might actually go down during the act.
Wait, their heart rate goes down while they're killing someone.
It can, yes. It's a sign of intense focus. It's the same way a surgeon's heart rate might steady when they make the first critical cut, or a sniper's heart rate before they pull the trigger.
So it's not rage, it's a task.
Yeah. It is a task. The act is planned. It is purposeful. The goal isn't to stop a threat. The violence is just a tool, an instrument, to get something else they want. Money, power, sexual gratification, revenge.
And the brains of these predatory types, they look different.
They do. In these individuals, their prefrontal cortex might be completely normal structurally. In fact, some of the more shocking studies in our stack suggest that in certain psychopaths, there might even be increased white matter length in key areas.
Wait, increased white matter. That sounds like a good thing. Doesn't that mean their brain works better?
In a purely computational sense, yes. White matter is the cabling. It's the fiber optic network connecting different parts of the brain. Increased white matter can mean faster processing speed. They can function logically, often at a very high level.
But something is missing.
The emotional connection to the act is missing. The part that makes the rest of us feel horror or empathy is it's offline.
That is genuinely terrifying. It means the CEO of their brain is working perfectly fine. He's just completely pathologically corrupt.
Precisely. The CEO knows all the company rules, all the laws. He just doesn't care about the moral cost of breaking them. He's running a business where murder is just a line item in the budget.
There was a fascinating study from the NIH in our source tech that looked at adolescents to try and predict which path they might go down. Because we often have this stereotype of the killer as the loner, the outcast. But that's not always true, is it?
No, and this study really challenges that stereotype in a big way. The NIH looked at personality profiles. The impulsive profile, the hot-blooded type, matched what you'd expect. High neuroticism, meaning lots of anxiety and depression. They were socially detached, emotionally volatile. The classic troubled kid we see in movies.
Right, the kid in the corner who never talks to anyone.
But the premeditated profile, the cold-blooded type.
Yeah, what do they look like?
The profile was associated with low agreeableness, which makes sense. They're not nice people. But they also scored high on extroversion.
High extroversion. So they're social, they're outgoing.
They can be, yes. Socially engaged, energetic, dominant. They aren't the ones hiding in the corner. They might be the ones leading the conversation, the life of the party. But underneath that charm, that charisma, they are cold, calculating, and manipulative.
Wow. That really flips the script on how we spot danger. We tell our kids to watch out for the creepy guy in the van, but the cold-blooded predator might be the captain of the football team or the charismatic new boss.
Exactly. They use that social skill as a tool, as camouflage. It allows them to get close to their victims. The cold killer knows how to mimic warmth and trust, whereas the hot killer is often too messy and volatile to hide what they are for long.
So we've established the hardware, the brain injuries, the amygdala issues, the two distinct tracks of hot and cold. We've got the personality profiles. But I'm still stuck on a key question. How does a person convince themselves to actually do it? Because even if you lack empathy, murder is a massive leap. You have to live with that choice. You have to justify it, even to yourself.
And that moves us from the hardware of the brain to the software, the operating system of belief. This is the psychology of cognitive distortions.
We're referencing the work of Jokelson and Samanow here, specifically their research on criminal thinking errors. This feels like cracking open the source code of evil.
It really is. It's the set of mental gymnastics required to rationalize the unthinkable. And according to the sources, it often starts with a profound emotional state they call the zero state.
The zero state. Unpack that. It sounds like a term from science fiction, but it's actually deeply, tragically emotional.
It is. The zero state isn't just feeling bad about yourself. It's a profound, pervasive, suffocating feeling of complete and utter worthlessness. The killer feels like a nothing, a zero. And this is the crucial part. They believe this feeling is permanent. I am nothing, and I will always be nothing.
So it's not just having a bad day or a low mood. It's a fundamental, unchangeable belief about their own existence.
Right. And you can't live in that state of non-existence forever. The psychological pain is too immense. So to escape the zero state, they feel they need a massive, world-altering reaction. They need to exert total dominance over their environment to prove they exist.
And that reaction is what the research calls the power thrust.
Exactly. To go from 0 to 100, they need a power thrust to regain a sense of control and significance. And what is the ultimate power thrust?
Taking a life.
It's the ultimate assertion of, I am here and I matter. I have the power to end you. It's a desperate, horrific scream for significance.
But surely they have a conscience, even a damaged one. There's a huge barrier in the human mind that says, thou shalt not kill. How do they get past that?
They use a two-part mechanism the researchers called corrosion and cutoff. This is absolutely critical to understand. Think of corrosion as the slow, steady wearing down of internal deterrents.
Like acid on metal or rust.
Exactly like rust. It's the internal monologue that goes on for weeks, months, or even years. It's the constant repetition of thoughts like, it's not that bad, or they deserve it, or society's corrupt anyway, so the rules don't matter. It's slowly eating away at the metal gate of your conscience.
So it's not a sudden snap. It's a long, slow process of justification.
It's a marathon of self-deception. And then, once the gate is rusted through, you have cutoff.
And what's up?
Cutoff is the switch. It's a mental technique they develop where they can instantly block out fear, conscience, or doubt to commit the act. It's like pulling a main breaker in their mind. Jokelson and Samanow describe it as an almost instantaneous elimination of all deterrence. They go from, maybe I shouldn't do this, to it's happening now in a split second.
So they spend years corroding the lock, and then one day they just kick the door open and shut off their feelings entirely.
That's the mechanism. And once they engage cutoff, they describe being in an almost trance-like state of action. Nothing else matters but the objective.
The sources also talk about something called super optimism, which sounds like a corporate buzzword, But in this context, it's deadly.
It is. As they get closer and closer to the crime, all doubt just evaporates. They become absolutely convinced that their plan is flawless. I cannot get caught. I am smarter than all the police. It's a delusion of invincibility that is necessary to overcome the final hurdle of fear.
Of course. If you really thought you were going to get caught, you probably wouldn't do it. So you have to convince yourself you're a ghost.
Exactly. And then after the fact, if things go wrong or if they feel a flicker of guilt, that leads to another distortion called mollification.
That's the blame game.
It's the ultimate blame game. It's blaming external forces for their actions. I didn't want to hurt her, but she pushed me to it. The world forced me into this corner. I had no choice. It's a way of offloading all responsibility so they don't have to carry the moral weight of the act.
They become the victim in their own story of a crime they committed.
Always. The world is the aggressor, and they are simply reacting to it.
The source breaks these distortions down into primary and secondary categories. Primary seems to be the core belief, the self-centeredness of me versus the world, and secondary is the clean up all the tricks for neutralizing the guilt.
Right. Primary is the entitlement. The world owes me. I'm special, so the rules don't apply to me. Secondary is the excuse-making. I'm only doing this because. It's the rationalization. And together, they explain how someone who, on the surface, seems normal can convince themselves to do the absolutely unthinkable. They aren't necessarily hallucinating demons. They're just telling themselves a very, very convincing story where they are the hero, or at least the justified avenger.
Let's pivot now to a specific type of killer where this story becomes a central part of their entire life, the serial killer. Because for them, the murder isn't just a single moment of rage or desperation, it's a lifestyle, it's a cycle.
Yes. For the serial killer, the act begins long, long before the first drop of blood is ever spilled. For them, it always starts with fantasy.
Now, we've touched on fantasy before with that 91% statistic. But for the serial killer, this is different, isn't it? It's not just a fleeting dark thought in traffic.
Not at all. It is obsessive, all-consuming visualization. The research highlights the grandiosity of the ego in these fantasies. They replay the scenario over and over and over in their minds. They are the director, the writer, and the star of a very dark movie playing on a loop inside their head.
And in this movie, everything goes perfectly. They are in complete control.
In the movie, they are God. They have total, absolute control. The victim says exactly what they want them to say, reacts how they want them to react. This is the fantasy phase, and for them, it's a powerful drug.
But like any drug, the high wears off. The fantasy eventually isn't enough.
That's when the compulsion kicks in. The urge to act it out, to make the movie real, becomes undeniable. It's a psychological itch that becomes so intense it has to be scratched.
Which leads to planning and prowling. The game begins. They start looking for a victim, a location.
And finally, that leads to the act. But here is the fascinating and deeply disturbing part found in the sources, and it explains why they can never stop. The act itself is almost always a disappointment.
A disappointment? How can murder be a disappointment?
Because reality can never match the perfect fantasy. In reality, the victim doesn't follow the script, they die too quickly, or they scream in a way the killer didn't expect, or it's just messier and more chaotic than they imagined. The high they get from the real thing isn't as pure or as perfect as the simulation they've been running in their head for months.
That is a profound insight.
Yeah.
It means they are chasing a high that doesn't actually exist in the real world.
Precisely. They finish the act, and instead of feeling satisfied and fulfilled, they feel let down, empty, which leads to the cooling off period. The tension subsides, yes. But because the act was a disappointment, the fantasy eventually creeps back in. They start thinking, next time I'll get it right, next time it will be perfect. And the entire cycle resets, often becoming more violent as they chase that impossible perfection.
The sources highlight the Holmes and DeBurger typologies, which categorize the why behind these serial killers. We should run through these because they really show the diversity of motivation. It's not all the same driver.
Right. First, you have the visionary killer. These are the individuals driven by hallucinations or delusions. God told me to kill these people. The neighbor's dog is possessed by Satan and is giving me orders through the fence. These killers are often suffering from severe psychosis. They've broken with reality.
They're not the psychopath in the traditional sense. They're psychotic.
A critical distinction. Next is the mission-oriented killer.
These guys see themselves as vigilantes.
In a way, yes. They see themselves as cleaner uppers. They believe they are ridding the world of a specific group they deem unworthy: prostitutes, drug dealers, a particular race or religion. They don't see themselves as evil. In their minds, they're performing a public service. It's highly ideological. They aren't killing for fun. They're killing for a cause.
Then you have the hedonistic category. This seems like the broadest one, the one we see most in movies.
It is. This is, simply put, killing for pleasure. And it breaks down further. You have lust killers who have fused violence with sexual arousal. You have thrill killers who are addicted to the adrenaline rush of the hunt and the kill. And you have comfort killers who kill for material, gain money, insurance payouts, a better lifestyle. The classic Black Widow often falls into this category.
And finally, the fourth type, the power control killer.
For many researchers, this is the most terrifying because it's so pure in its malice. The goal isn't really sex, and it isn't money. The goal is the ultimate experience of domination over another human being. To have the power to decide who lives and who dies, that is the ultimate drug for them. Think of killers like Ted Bundy or BTK. It was about ownership and control.
The sources also make that classic distinction between the organized and disorganized mind. This feels like the difference between a Hannibal Lecter and, well, just a chaotic mess.
That's a very fair analogy. The organized killer typically has high intelligence. They are often socially competent, maybe even married with kids. They meticulously plan the details. They bring their own weapon and take it with them. They follow their crimes in the news. They are playing a game of chess with the police. This aligns more with that psychopath profile we discuss, the cold blood.
And the disorganized?
Typically lower intelligence, socially inadequate, often a loner. The crime is impulsive, a blitz attack. They use a weapon of opportunity, a rock, a lamp, and just leave it at the scene. The crime scene itself is chaotic. This aligns more with the psychotic or highly impulsive, hot-blooded profile. They aren't playing chess. They are just lashing out in a frenzy.
So that's the slow, horrifying burn of the serial killer. But there's another monster in the closet, and the sources make a very sharp distinction here, the mass murderer. This is not a cycle. It's a single terrible explosion.
It is a singular event, and crucially, it is very often a suicidal event. They go into it with no plan to go home.
It's all about the final straw.
Yes. While the serial killer cools off and meticulously plots the next one, the mass murderer is building up pressure to a single crescendo. There is almost always a specific trigger, a final straw. Loss of a job, a messy divorce, a public humiliation, something that confirms their zero-state belief.
And the psychology behind it is different.
Fundamentally, it's a long history of frustration, failure, and resentment combined with that cognitive distortion we mentioned, the externalization of blame. They don't look in the mirror and say, I messed up my life. They look out at the world and say, you did this to me. They want revenge against an entire world that they feel has wronged them.
This is where the source material from Dysinger and Malloy becomes incredibly practical and chilling. They break down the specific warning behaviors. Because unlike the careful serial killer who hides in the shadows, the mass murderer often leaks their intent.
Right. They break it down into distal, meaning long-term, and proximal, meaning near the attack, behaviors. The distal behaviors are the soil that the violence grows in over months or years.
Things like personal grievance and moral outrage.
I was hurt, and it is an injustice. That's the core belief that starts it all. And they almost always frame this personal grievance with an ideology. They find a belief system, be it political, religious, or something like incel culture, that validates their anger and gives them a script. I'm not a loser, I'm a soldier in a war for this cause.
The sources also mention failure of sexual pair bonding as a common distal factor.
Yes, often referred to as the incel dynamic, but it can be broader. Just a history of broken, volatile, and failed relationships. It contributes powerfully to that sense of rejection and zero-state worthlessness.
But the proximal warnings, the ones that happen in the days and weeks right before the attack, those are the ones that could save lives if people notice them.
Absolutely. The biggest one, according to the research, is leakage. This is telling a third party about the intent to do harm. And it is shockingly common, especially in adolescent shooters. They tell a friend, they post on a forum, they write it in a journal they know someone will find. It's a cry for help and a boast at the exact same time.
Then there's identification.
The pseudo-commando mindset. They start dressing the part, buying the tactical gear, obsessing over weapons and military history. They are adopting a warrior mentality. They're consciously separating themselves from civilian life and preparing for what they see as war. If you see someone suddenly obsessed with military gear who has no military background, that is a major red flag.
And novel aggression.
This is a tryout, a smaller act of violence unrelated to the main target. Maybe they start a fight at a bar for no reason, or they're cruel to an animal, or they vandalize property. It's them testing their own capacity for violence. They're asking themselves, can I actually go through with this?
And the one that seems the most counterintuitive? The energy burst.
This is one of the most deceptive and dangerous signs. In the days immediately before the attack, there's a sudden, noticeable increase in activity. They are buying supplies, they are writing their manifestos, they are moving with a purpose they've lacked for months. But to an outside observer, they might just seem busy, or even like they're getting better. The depression lifts because they finally have a solution to their pain.
That is utterly terrifying. The calm before the storm.
And that leads to the final stage. The last resort, what the researchers call the action imperative. It's the internal feeling that time has run out. There is no other option. I must do this now. Once they reach this stage, the cutoff is complete. The act is inevitable unless they are physically stopped by an outside force.
Listening to all of this, the damaged hardware of the brain, the corrupt software of cognitive distortions, the slow corrosion of conscience, the triggers, it all leads to a massive, deeply uncomfortable philosophical question. And the sources touch on this with the FPA Med material.
Free will versus determinism, the oldest question there is.
Exactly. If your frontal lobe is damaged from a childhood injury, or your amygdala is hijacked by your biology, or you've been conditioned by years of abuse to have these cognitive distortions, do you really have free will in that moment?
It's the central friction point between the legal system and modern neuroscience. The law, by necessity, has to assume you have free choice. You chose to pull the trigger. But neuroscience sees a long chain of biological and environmental causes that led to that moment.
The sources use the term hijack, the concept that an addiction or an impulse can literally hijack the biological system.
Right. If the brakes on a car fail, can you really blame the car for not stopping? But of course, we are humans, not cars. We have that reflective capacity. The terrifying part is trying to determine how much of that capacity is actually intact in any given killer at the moment of the crime.
It makes you wonder about the very definition of evil. Is evil a spiritual failing, a moral choice, or is it a ventromedial prefrontal cortex injury?
And if it's an injury or a faulty adaptation from our evolutionary past, how do we punish that? More importantly, how do we prevent it? It changes everything.
We've traced the path today from the homicide adaptation deep in our collective DNA, through the broken brakes of the frontal lobe, through the cognitive distortions that silence the conscience, all the way to the chilling fantasy cycles and the final energy burst before the act.
It's a complex, dark, and tangled web.
I want to leave you with a final thought, and it goes back to that statistic we started with. If 91% of us have had the thought of murder, and the only difference between us and them is a fragile, delicate balance of brain chemistry, cognitive filtering, and life circumstances.
How secure is that balance, really?
Are we all just one bad day, one car accident, one traumatic event, one frontal lobe injury away from finding ourselves in that zero state? Are we truly the pilot of the plane, or are we just passengers, hoping the biological autopilot doesn't glitch?
It's a terrifying question to sit with.
Sleep well. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.